Welcome back. You're in the PolitBureau. The DA's head of policy, Gwen Ngwenya, has resigned. Penning a resignation letter to DA leader Mmusi Maimane, Ngwenya alleges the party simply doesn't take policy seriously, explaining that as head of policy, she was put in a position without any real power.
When you actually look through the DA policy itself, and I think this is a question we need to ask the DA, we don't know where was this office envisioned as being. So I think in the absence of any other evidence, we're going to have to take the letter at its word and believe that what she's saying is quite accurate.
The resignation has been seen by some as a proxy in the ongoing identity battle within the party. In 2018, Ngwenya was at the center of a standoff over whether to drop race as a determining factor in the DA's policy on empowerment and redress, something she believed ought to happen.
People who do argue for removing race will say, actually, this will enable us to benefit a lot more black South Africans than we were ever doing before. So actually, if you care about black empowerment, if you want to advance the economic interests of black South Africans, this is the policy that's going to do so. So actually, I think the fact that the principal beneficiaries will be black South Africans will absolutely be at the forefront of communicating the message of a non-racial policy.
So, is the DA in a shambles with elections just over 100 days away? Joining us in studio is Solly Malatsi of the DA and Professor Iva Sarakinsky from the Wits School of Governance. Gwen Ngwenya was asked to come onto the show but did not respond to the invite. Let me start out with you, Solly. Does the DA care about policy? And if so, why is Gwen Ngwenya disaffected and seemingly stifled?
Absolutely, we care about policy development. I think the mistake that's being made in the analysis of this whole situation is to reduce the process of policy formulation to one individual. I mean, the DA, if you track even the performance through their parliamentary program, been at the forefront of providing policy alternatives, even in Parliament, in terms of what our economic offer is, in terms of what our good governance offer is, in terms of what our approach to immigration is, for instance. And last year in September, we were first out of the blocks to outline what our priorities going into this election would be. And that eventually culminated even with the appointment of Ms. Ngwenya as the head of policy, because that commitment to making sure that as the official opposition that is also in government in some of the key metros, we are at the forefront of having a credible offer that will help us realize our vision of building one South Africa for all.
Professor Sarakinsky, why is the DA faced with these problems so close to elections? Is it more factional battles, albeit in a different party, different colour party?
Well, there'll always be differences of opinion on policy in parties and between parties. The interesting aspect of this event is the public revelation of that letter, which is a stinging letter with a lot of detail of inner turbulence within the DA. And that tells us that the DA is uncomfortable, irrespective of who leaked it to the media. It's a sign that there's unhappiness there. And this unhappiness, rather than the detail of policy, is going to be more damning than a fight or a dispute about whether BEE should or should not include race.
Solly, what's the official policy on things like BEE and redress? I understand Mmusi Maimane has said that this will become crystal clear when you launch your manifesto, but voters are watching.
No, absolutely. Voters are watching because, I mean, as the official opposition, the expectation that will be at the forefront of providing credible solutions. The leader has been consistently clear that any attempts to ensure economic empowerment will need to take into consideration that race remains a proxy for disadvantage in South Africa, and that going forward you need to take into consideration elements of making sure that any intervention of economic empowerment, given the history of our country, takes into consideration.
So if he's been so unequivocal, why is there this conflict within your party? Why can't you say unequivocally, this is the DA's stance on BEE and redress?
Because in the process of any policy formulation, during that discussion, nothing is absolute. It is important that in the process of compiling the policy, there will be robust voices. As the Prof said, in any political environment, when you develop policy, because different sectors in the party have a key interest in shaping the policy direction of the party, it will always be robust. And I think what we are getting used to here is as the party grows with far more interest and scrutiny, when different individuals make pronouncements in the process of shaping policy, that then becomes the focus.
Professor Rakinski, is it good enough for the official opposition, with millions of South Africans already putting their trust in the DA, not to be clear on this matter with elections literally weeks away?
Well, the voters will decide. As a political party, you want to go into a really important election with the clearest possible statement of your intent. And there are a whole range of complications here. Is that the DA stands for, or historically has stood for, a liberal agenda. Moving to race, some have accused them of being ANC light in terms of letting the ANC shed the policy agenda or set the policy agenda, isn't helping them in terms of differentiate themselves from other parties on this issue. And that's why this debate, I think, was quite important. Because if the policy unit could come up with some innovative ways of looking at BEE and empowerment outside of just blanket race categories by putting in thresholds so that the beneficiaries aren't beneficiaries ad infinitum, then I think we're starting to move forward in this issue, and that could have been an attractive appeal to communities who have not benefited from socio-economic development over the last 20 years. So I think it's a lost opportunity.
Solly, it sounds as though the DA is trying to spin the fact that you are, whichever way you put it, at war with yourself, between an old guard, traditional white, liberal part of the party, and another faction that wants to embrace what Mmusi Maimane calls African liberalism. What's your response?
Look, I think there's an exaggeration every time in the organization there's difference of opinion. I think it will also be a bit naive to think that in a growing political party at all given stages, there will be the same opinions, the same agreement in terms of what tactical approaches should be. I think what we have been able to portray is that internal discussions become robust, and that gets carried out in the media. But our focus has always been that we make sure that we are at the forefront of providing credible solutions to the problem that South Africa faces, that where we govern well, that our focus, even in our economic policy approach, that there's an emphasis on making sure that job creation is the #1 priority, that empowerment becomes a key element of that, that we can make sure that where we are in government, we make sure that we extend support to SMMEs, because that's where the future of job creation is.
Professor Rakinski, do you buy it? I mean, the DA was always going to have this problem once it started growing. There's no political party in South Africa that has a big enough membership of over 100,000 at least that doesn't get faced with factional battles. Even a party that's as small as the PAC is faced with the same challenges.
Indeed. And the DA is almost a victim of its own success, in that its rapid growth over the last 10 years has meant that there's intense competition for positions within at national, provincial, and local levels. And that competition has played itself out in sometimes unconstructive ways. And I think that this is one of those issues. Why give someone who is talented a position of director of policy and not provide the infrastructure for that person to do the work? If the allegations in her letter are correct, that there was no finance, there were no researchers, these are difficult issues. You can't do this on just walking down the road. You need serious research, and if you don't have the capacity to do the research, you can't actually have a meaningful debate. So it sounds as if the old guard, to use that phrase, were trying to hobble the new incumbent as policy director by not providing the infrastructure, because they were trying to be conservative in presenting a vision of South Africa which is ANC light in a sense.
So, Solly, I'm going to get you to pitch to me. I'm a 22-year-old black first-time voter, unemployed graduate that's trapped in poverty in, let's say, Lusikisiki. Why should I vote for you based on your policies around redress and BEE that could or could not get me a job?
Because absolutely, our policy focus is making sure that all those South Africans, like you, if you are from Lusikisiki, who have been denied opportunities because of either their background, of their race, that there is equality in terms of access to opportunities, that there's support, be it in the form of vouchers for those that are new entrants into the market, that there is proper funding of the education system so that we can produce matriculants or graduates that are properly skilled have the right knowledge and the skills to compete in the economy, either through pursuing higher education or starting their own business. But more importantly, that where we govern, we make sure that we prioritize good governance, because that is also an essential ingredient to the credibility of any government.
Do you think that that's good enough, Professor Sarkinski? I mean, was it a decent enough explanation that should encourage disaffected youth voters, older voters that are trapped in poverty, that the DA will be their custodian of their hopes and their dreams? And can you actually solve something like this just by saying we'll govern better where we do?
Well, the situation in Tshwane suggests that that's not the case, with the Auditor General ruling that tender is illegal. And the city manager appointed by a DA government is now in trouble. Similarly, in Cape Town, selling public land, 100 million discount, that doesn't inspire the poor to think that their interests are being catered for.
In Johannesburg, there was an allegation that a tender was tailor-made for the likes of the EFF.
Well, there are two. There's interference in the Johannesburg Road Agency, where the head of department left because he didn't get support from the political head in terms of his attempts to keep politicians out of the tendering of work there. So this discourse of the DA we govern better is only partly true. There are sufficient examples to say that it's not as simple or as clear as that. But at the same time, governing well, a clean audit's not the same thing as delivering services. And anyone who drives through Cape Town, Muizenberg and Lavender Hills, you see the discrepancies. You go to Constantia and you compare to Lavender Hills, you see the difference. It's a question of how you use that money that you've got to uplift and equalize society. And that's where I think the DA is at a disadvantage, because they have a difficulty in convincing poor people who are looking at the rich suburbs, which are strong DA strongholds, to say, but are they going to act in my interests? Don't they just want my vote? And that, I think, is the perception battle that the DA has to
Professor Sarkinski, we'll unfortunately have to wrap. Solly, we'll also have to leave it at that. We've run out of time. Coming up next, Spinners and Spanners. Jacob Zuma loses his record deal.